Okay, let's try this. Welcome to a short video on long run cost. So remember, in the long run that a firm can change all its input amounts, all land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, including the plant size. So in the short run, plant size is fixed. So all costs become variable in the long run because you can completely liquidate, sell off everything, and go out of business in the long run. It's also a time period where there is time for new firms to come into an industry. If it's profitable, they can leave if it's not profitable. So let's take a look at first at those short run curves. If we go to the next slide, maybe. Yes, here we are. So let's say this short run average total cost curve, let's say, doesn't have any amounts down there. Let's say that the bottom of this short run curve is, let's say that's $25. So if we build a bigger plant, then our long run average total cost may go down to $20. And if we build an even bigger plant, the long run cost may go down to $18. But eventually, they're going to have too many plants and get too big. So unlike in the short run, in the long run, you don't ever want to see the long run curve go past that minimum amount, because that means you've gotten too big. The company's just gotten too big and unmanageable. So the reason, and this is very important, the reason the long run curve goes down in this case is because of economies of scale. So what are economies of scale? You probably already know that, but that means when you minimize your long run cost per unit by producing more and more and more. And these are things that add to economies of scale. You may have labor specialization. You have certain people specializing in certain types of labor, or certain managers that specialize. Capital. Now here's an important one. Capital resources capable of further production. There's a good example in your text about the Burson stamping machine. It is a big piece of equipment that allows automobile hoods to be stamped in just a matter of minutes, where it used to take hours to produce them. Now, that's a very expensive piece of machinery, but this business could add that, buy that, and then spread it over more and more output, and the cost goes down. So let's take a look at some other things here. But economies of scale, that's the reason that the long run average total cost curve goes down. In the short run, it's because of increasing productivity of workers, and eventually, and that makes costs go down, but not in the long run. It's economies of scale. But it is possible that a big company will reach the diseconomies of scale. They've gotten so big that they're totally out of control. They cannot control the plant. They can't communicate with workers. So workers get lazy and think, well, nobody's paying attention to me. So they shirk their responsibilities, and those cause diseconomies of scale. Or maybe they've just gotten too big. Looking at this next slide, this is an important definition. So test, question, alert, minimum efficient scale, lowest level of output at which long run average costs are minimized, and it can determine the structure of the industry. Looking at, we're going to skip over and look at the an example of where a long run cost curve might look like this. A company, let's say, benefits from economies of scale, but it may reach a point where they have constant returns to scale. Good example of this is the banking industry. A bank may add branches, and when they add the branches, they get more customers. So they're benefiting, they're getting really constant returns to scales. They build another branch, they add more customers, so their costs don't really go up in total, but they still could reach a point where they get to this diseconomies of scale here on the right. And we've seen that happen. You've seen bank branches close. They just had too many. Bank of America closed in Joplin. Commerce Bank in Joplin used to have 4 branches. Now they only have 2. So it is possible that they reach that diseconomies of scale. That means they cut back. They have to, because their costs are going up and getting out of control. Looking at this next slide, average total cost, this would be a natural monopoly where, or maybe even a company that's close to a monopoly, like Intel, benefits from economies of scale. They can produce more and more and more at lower cost. So it's going to be hard to come in and compete with them. Now, they never want to reach the point where their long run costs go up. They've just gotten too big and too inefficient. So, they don't ever want to see that happen. And get to where that long run cost curve is going up. It's inevitable in the short run. As workers become less productive. But in the long run, it shouldn't happen. Nobody ever wants to get to that point. So let's look at it. Maybe a small retailer, those economies of scale may be used up fairly quickly. And then they reach the minimum efficient scale, the lowest level of output. And then their cost may start to go up again, and they've reached those diseconomies of scale. So that, again, no company ever wants to see that happen. Some good examples of that, again, the Burson stamping machine, you might take a look at that one. Another great example, and I did put some notes on long run cost in your PowerPoints after, or in your course documents right after the PowerPoint chapter 9. But some other great examples, Toyota in the early 2000s broke their rule. They had never built a new car in a new plant with new workers. And when they started doing that, they started having recalls, and they ended up with their first loss in 60 years when they did that. It was too inefficient. Ford Motor Company thought, oh, the Model T is so great, we're going to build a bigger plant, build the Model A. Didn't work out. They lost money on everyone they sold. There were some 75,000 workers in that plant. I mean, how are you going to control that, especially before cell phones? So they just got out of hand. Another great example out there, you've all heard of Twinkies. Everybody's familiar with those. That company, I'm blanking out on the name of it now, but they just kept buying more and more bakeries, buying out other competitors, and they ended up with so many different collective bargaining agreements, so many different routes, that they started to lose money. And it was Hostess Bakery, and they filed for bankruptcy. Fortunately, somebody bought out Twinkies, and we still have them. So they're still available out there. But in the long run, again, very important here, long run costs go down because of economies of scale. In the short run, the costs go down because of productivity increases. And then they reach law of diminishing returns. Is when those costs start to go up again. Not in the long run. In the long run, it's diseconomies of scale. So I hope that's clear. And make sure you look at your notes in course documents.